Hello and welcome to Indus Special. I'm Meshal Malik. Higher education is supposed to be a tool for social mobility, a gateway to better opportunities in life. If you work hard enough, you will be able to navigate through the hurdles and achieve something. At least that is what students are told. Yet despite the rising cost of earning a degree, many fresh graduates find themselves without jobs. The ILO in 2018 reported that the global youth unemployment is 3 times higher than the figure for adults. So a series of questions arise. What return can individuals expect for investing in degrees? And who determines which degree is worth what? And what are the cracks in the higher education systems that need to be rectified? On tonight's show, we try to explore these issues and try to find answers. Joining us for this discussion today is Professor Stephan Keen, who's a professor of economics, joining us from Amsterdam. We are also joined by Dr. A.H.Nayyar, who's a physicist, joining us from Lahore. Thank you both for joining us. Professor Keen, let me begin with you. So before we start getting into the wider questions, the more in-depth questions, let's set the premise. What do you think defines the quality of education, and how do we perceive it to be in today's world?
Well, fundamentally, when it's focusing on not just education, but research, and putting the primary emphasis on learning for learning's sake and research for research's sake. And I think both of those have suffered dramatically under the swift switch from the old, rather more government-funded system to the private system we have fundamentally today.
Yeah. And do you think over here, when you're saying the quality of education, how much of that is being determined by the job market? When the employers determine the quality of education, when they try to put the worth on it?
Well, I think, in fact, the employers are suffering as much as the university academics and students are from this whole thing, because the impact of the marketing push that really dominates how universities are managed today has meant that it's been an emphasis upon getting as many students in as possible. It's been volume rather than quality, and the attention given to teaching and research has declined dramatically. So I think, in fact, even though the private sector may have wanted to have a private model for universities, the impact has been to diminish the quality of the graduates that private sector is getting. And at some point, they're going to end up complaining about a product which they had a large part in determining through an ideological focus rather than one focusing on the actual nature of education and research.
Yeah. And Professor, do you think this is a global phenomenon when we talk about how the quality of research is decreasing?
Absolutely. I've experienced it in 2 countries myself, Australia and the UK, of course, both Anglo-Saxon countries. But I've perceived the same thing as I've been doing my travels around the world. And all I see is universities marketing themselves, paying enormous salaries to their chief executives as if they're managers of commercial corporations, as though they're virtual Elon Musks. And what gets dribbled down to the students and dribbled down to the academics has been diminishing all the way through.
Yeah. So let's bring Dr. Nayyar into this conversation as well. Doctor, what can you tell us? Do you also share the same views as Professor Keen? Do you feel like the quality of education in these higher education institutions is on the decline because of the fact that funds are being misallocated?
Well, there is this global scenario and there is this local scenario. I think the answer to your question would be different for the 2 scenarios. At the level of higher education, you see, one should distinguish between 2 different kinds of disciplines being pursued at the higher education level. Number one, the ones which are the areas where human knowledge is being expanded. The horizons of the knowledge are expanding, and therefore people are basically trying to discover newer things and advancing the frontier of knowledge. That is the pure sciences, pure knowledge, pure history, pure anthropology, and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And the other one is utilitarian higher education, which is needed to run various technologically advanced knowledge into the daily use. Now, you need both of them. One of them certainly is of commercial nature because it produces people who are immediately absorbed in the market. And therefore, they are the people who look at achieving that degree as a kind of investment into their future, and therefore they are ready to pay to get back to get into the market, into the profession. The other who are pursuing pure sciences and pure knowledge, pure knowledge, will basically be those which will have to be supported by the state, by the society, not by the market, because market actually doesn't care about them very much. And there, I think the states will have to be cognizant that they will have to provide resources to that kind of knowledge.
So, Dr. Nayyar, let me just ask this question in a different way. Do you think that the market holds no value for those degrees at all? The ones that are geared towards learning about human nature, pure sciences?
Yeah, I think so. I think the market value of them is on a level where maybe there are industrialists and there are billionaires that invest in institutions of pure research, put endowment funds that contribute to the endowment funds of those institutions. There would be those as well. Yeah. But then the market, by the market, what we mean is actually the bulk of the market, which is essentially utilitarian in approach. And over there, I think the essential thing is to see the balance between the input and the output of resources. Okay,
so Dr. Nayyar, I've registered your point here, but I do want to ask Professor Keen the same question in light of all that you have said. Professor Keen, do you agree with the doctor's argument here that there are commercial degrees and then there are hard sciences, humanities degrees, and the commercial degrees are what the market seeks?
Fundamentally, that's true. And I've seen that have a dramatic impact upon the actual deep research and deep subjects, such as physics, at a trivial level, my own profession of economics. I have seen both these disciplines and others shut down at universities in favour of courses in marketing itself, in nursing, in business administration, because that's where the dollar sales come from. And the result is that we're actually undermining the foundations of those very disciplines themselves, because ultimately what actually gives the foundation to all the advances we do in every area of human endeavour is the deep research. Yeah. Now, because you can't make money out of it, that ceases being funded. And literally, I know universities which have considered shutting down their physics departments because they don't make enough money. Now, that is a 3 months perspective on what should be a 300-year vision of how humanity advances.
And what about when we talk about innovation, ideas, all those things, don't they require those types of fields, literature, humanities, all those fields that are being shut down?
Well, yes, that's true. And what actually is happening fundamentally is that my perspective is that at one end, the privatisation, which is always put on an ideological basis that the private sector does things better than the public sector, completely ignores marketing. If you have a publicly funded institution, it doesn't need. Once they're privately, there's a dozen of them all marketing, and 80% of the money goes into marketing rather than what's left over for research and teaching. And then in that area, they sell the ones which the short term, as the doctor said, the short term stuff that is that's easy to get people to come and put their backsides on a chair to listen to a set of lectures. The deep research, you can't make money out of that, therefore that gets shut down. So yes, it's dramatically undermining the calibre of university education at a time when we desperately need to improve our capacity to research this planet.
Yeah. Dr. Nayyar, how do you see the future landscape of education then evolving? Do you think there will be any changes? Or do you think that this need for the market to continuously demand more and more commercial degrees will drive out those students pursuing other degrees?
I think yes, because the success stories of those who go into subjects, utilitarian subjects, is enormous, and people see those to be very nicely paying, and therefore would perhaps be attracted to them more than towards pure sciences and pure social sciences kind of thing. However, I think this is where the states come in, and states will have to think about the cultural values to be given to societies, to their societies, and cultural values coming from all the knowledge that comes in from pure sciences and social sciences and so on and so forth. These are the ones which give rise to the advancement in culture and development of the society on the cultural level. States will have to think about them, and those states where these things are being supported by the state, I think the university, the future of the university will certainly be bright, will be good. But in societies where there is a rush towards getting the best in the shortest possible time, I think there the pure sciences and pure humanities kind of disciplines will be neglected, and there will be more people going in these directions.
But isn't it true, Dr. Nayyar, the market forces do, of course, give higher value to these commercial degrees, but I was wondering, with the services sector expanding in so many countries, and even things like artificial intelligence growing, research into that growing, which require knowledge and expertise on human behavior as well, don't you think the market will create more opportunities in the future for these pure sciences, pure humanities degrees?
I hope so. I hope so. I think this will happen in the industrially advanced countries, where there are those people who can invest in both of these things. But in developing societies, I think the investments will be more in for the utilitarian subjects than for the pure sciences. And the seekers of knowledge will also go more towards these things than pure knowledge. I think although we know that pure sciences also contribute a great deal towards development of all the other things, but that comes in at a level which is not discernible, which is not quite something that people see very easily. And therefore, they, particularly in the developing societies, they do not see those things coming in. And I think there is an urge to sort of enhance the rate of development by least amount of investment and a very rapid return on them.
Yeah, I take that point there. Professor Keen, something that I talked to you about is in reference to what you mentioned earlier, how there is not enough emphasis on research and the quality of education being disseminated in these institutions. How do you think that's affecting the market supply of labor? How do you think that affects the professional atmosphere?
Undermined it dramatically. I can give examples of universities I've worked at and others I've known where academic staff used to, for example, as a professor, be expected to teach 4 hours per week and have the rest of their time for research and scholarship. And now, when I left my last university, and I know from many colleagues around the world, they're now working 12 hours a week face-to-face, 3 times as much. The remaining time they have is taken up with attending useless bureaucratic meetings. I can't use the word on camera to describe what these books are, but a book by David Graeber talking about the nature of jobs, 2 words, is very apt for what a lot of it we're caught up in doing. So the caliber of the education itself has plunged dramatically because of this ridiculous emphasis upon privatization and marketing of universities rather than fundamental research and teaching and scholarship.
And Professor Keen, you mentioned how so much money is going into marketing. And of course, it's no secret how the costs of education, higher education, are rising. In the US alone, apparently, the total student debt amounts to $1.5 trillion. What do you think, when we're eliminating factors such as inflation and, let's say, putting aside marketing, what do you think is causing for this unexpected rise in education cost of education?
Well, it's fundamentally the cost of overheads have risen dramatically. And you can't leave marketing out of that. It's the fundamental overhead that's caused the decline in the quality of education. So as the cost of education have gone up, the amount of money actually reaching those who do the teaching and do the research has plunged dramatically. And what the students are getting consequently is a very badly watered down degree. The difference between the marketing and the actual content that students receive is now becoming ridiculous. And that's one reason I left the university sector halfway through last year. Sheer frustration at this factor. I'm better off as a pure researcher and a leading educator. I'm better off doing it outside the university sector than putting up with all the waste of time and money inside universities.
Well, Professor Keen, you've painted a very bleak picture for us there, and from your personal experience as well. We're going to discuss this further, but before that, we have to take a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back to Indus Special while we discuss higher education. Dr. Nayyar, let's move towards a discussion regarding globalization and how that's impacting higher education. With greater globalization and the need to standardize certain merits, how do you think education is changing? How have you witnessed the landscape change?
Well, the phenomenon of globalization has certainly pushed more and more students towards higher education. At least this is what we see in developing societies like Pakistan. Many of them would like to go and get into, they become aware of the value of certain sets of education, certain sets of education which are usually very beneficial to them financially, and therefore they go in that direction. I think the effect of globalization on institution of higher education has been in a different way as well, where the universities have now become less isolated from each other globally. They are closer to each other. They can communicate with each other more easily. They have much more information on their fingertips regarding whatever has been done or is being done elsewhere in the world. And therefore, the university academy actually has a greater amount of opportunities for entering into the production of knowledge.
Yeah.
I think that kind of thing is something which is
positive,
expanding the horizon of knowledge very tremendously. And that is also something which is causing universities to show their own productivity globally.
Yeah. Dr. Nayyar, I'm going to take this point to Professor Keen, something that you mentioned here, how globalization is creating more awareness for opportunities for students. But Professor Keen, of course, we know that there are many hindrances in trying to attain higher education for many segments of society, whether they're coming from developing nations to developed nations or whether they are within developed nations themselves. Could you take us through those problems that students face?
Well, one of the most obvious ones is that if you're going to be going overseas to study at another country, you're quite likely to be studying in not your first language. Now, and that's, of course, one classic example is Chinese students coming to study in the UK. Now, many of those Chinese students speak excellent English. Many of them don't. And the trouble is that what happens, because the whole pressure is on getting as many foreign students in, so the country providing that education sees it as a export industry, they drop the standards. Yeah. And this means that, yes, the students pass the exams, they get their qualifications. What they're fundamentally ending up with, though, is a credential, not an education. And when they end up working in the sector, they're less well trained than they would be if they'd stayed in their own country, where they can be obviously expected to reach 100% of the grammatical standards expected in China of Chinese students speaking Chinese. And the end result is that everybody gets cheated fundamentally, except the vice chancellors at the top who get paid huge salaries as if they're corporate executive giants.
So, Professor Keen, isn't that somehow catering to those who do not meet that standard? Isn't that a question of equity versus equality when we're talking about the education system?
It's partly also the level of quality you need for a university education. There are some disciplines where you simply have to have an enormous intellectual capacity to undertake the area, physics clearly being one of those areas. But in many others, because there's been an attempt to expand how many students go to university in the belief that's going to democratise education, the result has been that if you expand the number who are getting in and you still want to have the same pass rates, you've got to lower your bar. And I've seen a friend of mine, Tony Stokes, as it happens, an Australian academic, has done a study on what's actually happened as the number of students in Australia who go to university has risen from something in the order of 10% to 40% of the high school graduating cohort. The standard has plunged. And I'm sorry, that is not the way to run the sharp edge of education, which is what higher education should be.
But it seems that when we're talking about top universities, we also see that there is almost an artificial inflation of their standards as well. That often has to do with the ranking system. On the other side, isn't that the other side of the coin?
Oh, yes. And I mean, one of the most ridiculous rating systems, for example, one of the reasons I left the UK education system is what they call the teaching excellence framework. Now, teaching excellence, I am a third-rate teacher. Why am I a third-rate teacher? Because I went to Kingston University, where the rating scheme rated the entire university as what they call bronze, the highest standard being silver, and then gold. And now, I am not a third-rate educator, but that's what I was classed as because I was at Kingston. Ironically, that even happened to my current honorary position. I think University College London suffered very badly. It got a bronze rating. That is ridiculous. Yeah. You simply cannot rate an entire university. It depends upon the individuals who teach different courses, who do the research. And so it is absurd how this has degraded universities.
And I do want to talk about how rankings often hold many prestigious and elite universities hostage. But before that, I'd like to introduce another guest who's joined us, Sharon Kurniawan, who is an alumni of the University of Illinois, joining us from Jakarta. Thank you so much, Sharon, for joining us. Sharon, take us through your experience when you went to the United States. Why did you choose the United States to further your education, and what the entire experience was like?
I went to the United States because I wanted to pursue journalism. And in the States, it's so much better. The major's so much better there, the teachers, professors. And I also want a different experience because I've grown up 17 years in Jakarta. And if I go to the States, I assume there will be better teachings, better qualities, and then you can explore the culture and everything. And for me, being in the States is actually very fun because the teachers there and everybody there, they're very open-minded. Not like the Indonesian or Asian culture. We're more like shy. If we want to ask questions or we want to say something, we're normally like, oh, maybe I should not just say it now, say it later. But in America, they teach you like, just tell me what you want, and they're very straightforward. So I learned a lot there. And I think the education in America, for me, is really fun, very enjoyable.
Yeah. So Sharon, you mentioned how the degree there would you mentioned it with this sort of a obvious tone that it would be better in the United States. But what made you think that it would be? Was it research, or were you told, or did you feel like if you wanted a degree that would have international value, it should be from the United States?
I think we grew up being shown that the education in the States is so much better, because when we watch, like for me as a reporter or whatever, when you watch CNN or a BBC, the foreign news, you just feel the quality it's better, it's more they can ask anything. Because in my country, like if you want to ask government or political stuff, it's not really open. They need to close it down. So I feel like if I go to States, I can get like a lot of stuff that I could imply in Indonesia to change it. That's why I feel so much better, because they're more open-minded. That's all.
Yeah. So I take your point there, Sharon, but something I want to ask, and I'll ask Professor Keen this, is in regards to the United States education system. Now, there was a scandal, the U.S. college admissions scandal, which has taken the news by storm. It talks about how 50 people have been charged for paying millions in bribes. So I want to ask you, when we see the United States as a prime example of how higher education should be like, what are the flaws in the system there?
Oh, well, fundamentally that it's all driven by money. The main saving grace of the American education system actually isn't that you pay fees. It's that previous alumni have donated enormous sums from their successful industrial careers, and with those endowments, universities like Harvard can provide fantastic facilities, and students, once they get in there, they benefit from those facilities, and the endowment softens the blow of the market itself. But when you have the expansion of the number of universities around the world and the focus upon marketing internationally, then if it's all covered by the current cash flow and you don't have those endowments, the quality plunges. So I think a better model is actually the European countries that offer education for free, but you have to reach the standard to get in the first place. And that's the best way to do it.
Yeah. Dr. Nayyar, do you agree with that as well, that the European countries serve as the perfect example, as the best example for higher education at this point in time?
I agree with him that if the universities do not ask students to pay too much for their education, the state pays. His education is free, and if the state takes care of the good salaries of faculty members, then the university environment certainly gets much better. And if on the other hand, what you see every university education depends so much on the quality of faculty. And you can have faculty members which have degrees but may not be so very good, so inspiring. But if you have a competing faculty that is good at research and good at teaching and very inspirational to students, then that university certainly is going to be the objective of students. They would like to go and get educated over there. And at that point, finances should not come in the way. And in the U.S. universities, I see that there are so many opportunities for the students to get money if they do not have enough money to pay for their education in the universities. Universities subsist their education, although we are also aware that the amount of money that students need to pay for higher education in the U.S. is such that nearly half the working life of a student is spent in paying back that money.
So is the degree worth that then? If you're paying half your life, paying back for that degree, is it worth it?
You see, that is where you get into the problem of how much you invest in and how much you get out of it. Whereas if you are going for solid knowledge, a good academic environment where you have a very inspirational persons around you, and where your inquisitiveness gets rewarded, is something that is the fundamental need of an environment of higher education. And I think if you need to pay some money to get there, to be able to get into that, and then get educated in that environment, I think the kind of person that you become after getting through that is certainly worth it, rather than looking into the amount of money that you can make out of it.
Okay, so I'm going to ask Professor Keen this another way. Do you feel like students, while they're investing in their education, while they're picking a university, should keep in mind the return of investment they're going to get in their degree?
Well, I think I don't think they should even have to make that decision. I think they should be thinking about education, as the doctor said, in terms of the return of the person they become. rather than their capacity to market themselves to an employer. But because they're paying these enormous fees to get in there, then that's what they basically think about. And the emphasis becomes upon how good does my credential look rather than how much do I know. And fundamentally, what you will get is too many students with good credentials, knowing they don't really know what they're talking about, going into businesses where they spend their time trying to hide from everybody else how little they really know compared to what their certificates say they know. So I think we really are very much at an impasse of the university sector, and I honestly don't see a way out short of a catastrophe making it obvious. We simply have to change how we educate humanity.
Yeah, I take your point there, and you've made a very strong point. Sharon, let's talk about your experience a little more. How was studying abroad as an international student in terms of keeping up with the expenses, and also in terms of what you witnessed in regards to diversity in your environment, diversity of ethnicity, race, culture?
I think in terms of expenses, I am very fortunate to have a family who is able to support me all the way. But if you talk about my country in general, the people here, I don't think they have the finances because, first of all, our currency compared to the American dollar is so much weaker. So if you want to go to America, it's either you get a full scholarship or you got to work 2-3 different jobs to pay it off, or you get loans. So in that term, it's going to be harder to go to the States to study. But in terms of diversity in my school, I think there's a lot of diversity. I make a lot of friends from Pakistan, India, America, European countries, Australian, Korean, China. So the diversity is very good there. That's why when I was in my campus, in my college, U of I was actually very happy because I get to learn a lot of different cultures, different personalities. And for me, that is very, very fun.
Yeah, and Sharon, just one last question to you. When you were writing this degree, what were the factors that were in your mind? Was it pure aspiration to get a degree in journalism, or did you have other factors related to what the future would be like, or related to how much return on that degree you would get playing in your mind as well?
Okay, so I've always wanted to work in media, so journalism was something I've always wanted, so that's why I applied for journalism. But for me, growing up in Jakarta, if I get a degree from the States, because they have the mindset like, oh, anything with a degree out of town is so much better. So when I come back here, it's so much easier for me to get jobs. Like, people need to go through a lot of interviews and everything else, but because I showed my degree, it's from like America, they're like, oh, she's a US grad, it's so much easier for me to get jobs. So every time I apply here, I never fail to get what I want.
Yeah.
That's why we apply.
Thank you so much, Sharon, for joining us and talking to us. Dr. Nayyar, so you were listening into Sharon's experience here, and I wonder, for students who do not have the opportunity to go abroad, get a foreign degree, are they at a disadvantage when it comes to the domestic market, especially in developing countries?
Well, that depends. I mean, if they are to remain in the teaching profession in universities, certainly they would be at a disadvantage. But then, you see, the quality of faculty depends upon not just on where you got a degree from, but what did you do during your research for the degree. And if you are sufficiently well trained, and you have done respectable kind of work, then you can get a job anywhere within the country or outside the country. So I think the advantages certainly there, as I think I just heard. It is certainly true that certain things are essentially sold in the market by name, by brands. So if there is a person who has a degree from Harvard or MIT, then suddenly those people will say, oh yeah, since you have a degree from there, so you must be terribly good, and therefore we employ you before you compared to others. But there might be somebody who is from a local university who has done sufficiently good work to be slightly better than that person.
Yeah.
And I think it is a question of looking at the quality of individuals rather than the background of his degree. The quality of the individual is very important, and I think the terrible thing is that not many employers in a country like Pakistan would even have the quality to be able to judge the quality. So they may not be able to judge the quality correctly, and they may therefore rely on the brand name of the degree.
And I'm going to ask Professor Keen this as well from a more international perspective. What value do you think brand degrees hold? And do you think it's unfair to judge students solely on that degree, the brand name?
Yes, it is. Again, because it's homogenized. The idea of a brand means differentiation in the supermarket shelves. But fundamentally, when you get branding, the emphasis on the university itself is to homogenize everything. And unfortunately, with the higher education, it's the outstanding individuals and the outstanding ideas that have the impact for us on the long term. And that isn't told to you by a sheet of paper from somewhere like Harvard. That's one reason why I encourage students who want to learn something interesting in economics not to go to one of those brand universities, go to one of the lower ranked ones where innovation is actually possible.
Yeah. And Professor Keen, when we've been talking about higher education, but to take the conversation back a little, what do you think are the factors that determine a person's access to higher education, coming from the background they come and the education before it? Because when we talk about Ivy Leagues, there are legacy applicants which give them an immediate advantage as compared to other applicants. What are those types of factors that come into play?
Well, one of the ironies I experienced myself when I was an undergraduate student is that before I went to university, the only way you could get there was via a scholarship or by having wealthy parents. I had a scholarship. But as the university numbers expanded, the opportunity that degree gave me to get into a law department, I was actually working as a lawyer then, to get into a law firm, went from being enormous access to none, because when there were so many students there, the defining feature was, does your father or mother work in a law firm?
Yeah.
So you ended up undermining the attempt to give the access.
Yeah.
And fundamentally, by trying to democratize, we actually made it as much of a class system as it used to be back in the days when the only way you could get there was through wealth.
Yeah. Stay with us, Professor Keen. We're also joined by Pervez Hoodboy, who's an educationalist, joining us from Lahore. Thank you so much, Mr. Hoodboy, for joining us today. Let me start with you. Let me start with this question. When we have been talking about greater globalization and how that's impacting the educational landscape, what do you think is the room for indigenous education systems, and do you think that they have any value at all left?
Well, certainly. I think particularly in the sciences, there is a yardstick, an international yardstick. And everyone has to be measured by that. So take mathematics or physics or chemistry or even biology. You have to know that quantum of knowledge, which then says that you've entered a genuine higher education system. So in that sense, I'd say that there's not much scope for indigenization of physics or math. These are things that have been acquired by humanity over a very long time.
Yeah.
On the other hand, if you were to say, do we need to indigenize, let's say, in cultural studies or particular languages? Yes, of course, that is fundamentally focused upon a particular society at a particular time.
Yeah. And Mr. Hoodboy, previously we were talking about how in institutions all across the world there is a misallocation. Professor Keen here stressed upon the fact that more funds are going into marketing of education in these educational institutions as opposed to trickling down to where they actually matter. In your perspective, where do you think the reform needs to be in higher education in order to ensure there is a better quality there?
to how that might be done. But yes, I just watched a 10-second clip of the professor from Amsterdam, and he's absolutely right. There's a huge amount of money that is being spent upon marketing education rather than actual education, and actually see what they've learned during their 4 years or their more years at a university. I am certainly appalled by that. I believe that all this is a facade now in most colleges and universities. There, the money goes exclusively for the atmospherics, very little to where it should be going.
Yeah. So in your opinion, what do you think it needs to be going towards? And what can you tell us about the state of research right now?
Okay, here the situation would be very different from that in a European or a US university. What we fundamentally lack.
Professor Keen, let me ask you in relation to what Mr. Hoodboy was talking about was the importance of academic integrity. How do you think that is holding up in recent decades? And do you feel like there are any shifts in it going, is it improving? Is there more stress on it? We talked earlier about how there are many scandals coming out in the US. Do you think that has affected academic integrity?
I think it's declined dramatically. It is very, very difficult to speak out at a university these days, complain about anything internally, because, oh dear, you affect the marketing of that university externally. The amount of money that goes to academic salaries has declined over time compared to the amount of money going to administrator salaries, so you don't feel secure anymore. Academics are working on part-time contracts. There are even academics in the UK who are working on hourly contracts where if they turn up and there aren't enough students for a class, the class gets cancelled and the academic doesn't get paid. So that it is appalling how insecure academics are, and you can't do the type of challenging research we need if you feel insecure about your own position. And unfortunately, that's the world we've got ourselves into by falling for the god of privatizing higher education.
Yeah. Mr. Hoodboy, last question to you before we end the show. What can you tell us about how we can make higher quality education more accessible? What needs to be done there?
We have to challenge head on the cultural norm that allows cheating to go on and which allows immoral conduct. By immoral, I mean that which contravenes the fundamentals of academic integrity. And we've got to make examples of such people. Unfortunately, it's the very opposite now.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Mr. Pervez Hoodboy, for joining us, Professor Stephan Keen for joining us, Dr. A.H.Nayyar for joining us. Thank you for watching Indus Special. We will see you again next week with more stories. Till then, goodbye and take care.